I did one of these lists before, and I love more than just 10 games, so here's a sequel list. Same rules apply as last time. I'm not saying these are the best games of all time. It's just that on this channel, I tend to talk about a lot of the same games over and over again. So this is a chance to go a little bit more in depth with other games I enjoy, but rarely ever mention. Please remember that this isn't a top 10 list either, so I'm not ranking any of the games in order. Finally, I feel it's best to warn you that there will be a certain glaring omission from this discussion. There's one other game that's absolutely worthy of being here, but I'm gonna hold off from talking about it for right now. Without further ado, let's get started. Kirby Air Ride. Kirby isn't one of my absolute favorite Nintendo franchises, but there have been a handful of games over the years I've thoroughly enjoyed. Air Ride just so happens to be one of my all-time favorites. The head-to-head racing is serviceable, although just a tad more basic than Mario Kart, and the top-down racing is a cute novelty. But I think the absolute shining achievement in Air Ride is the city trial mode. I never expected to find a large-scale open world to explore in a vehicle-centric Kirby game, but damn if it wasn't one of the most fun time wasters I've ever experienced on the GameCube. I spent the bulk of my hundreds of hours devoted towards Kirby Air Ride in the city trial mode alone. The mode itself is easy to pick up and learn. Up to 4 players pick a vehicle and drive around a wide open city environment, collecting power-ups, using items to steal power-ups from other players, and building up the stats of their vehicles within a time limit. Once time runs out, those stat boosts are carried over into a head-to-head minigame where players compete to claim overall victory for the round. Aside from the game occasionally dropping hints, you never know what the final minigame will be until it arrives, so the fun of City Trial comes from the fact that no one is really sure which stat to focus on in order to perform the best in the end. There's a good variety of special events and minigames to play at the end of each round, so it never gets too boring or predictable. You might be having to glide the farthest on one occasion, go the fastest to win a one-lap race, or build up your vehicle's power and durability in order to survive an all-out melee in another. My approach was always just to try and build up all of my stats equally so I can be balanced and generally prepared for just about anything. The mode never gets too boring or predictable because no 2 rounds are ever alike. There are in-game events that take place which can allow players to earn bigger stat boosts by completing certain challenges, or by simply trying to avoid incoming hazards and keeping their upgrade progress intact. You can even customize the rules to your liking, so there's a slight Smash Bros. Feel to it. Speaking of which, the fact that City Trial was adapted in Smash for 3DS in the form of Smash Run should speak to its quality and fun. There's an entire wall of challenges to complete with plenty of secrets to unlock, such as additional characters, vehicles, minigames, and music tracks. But the absolute icing on the cake is the ability to play in this mode in free run, allowing you and other players to mess around endlessly in the environment without any time limit or hazardous events interrupting your game, discovering secret areas high and low, and making your own entertainment with no restrictions whatsoever. This was probably the closest equivalent I'll ever want to a 3D open world Kirby game. If you're looking for a Kirby game you can sink dozens of hours into, or something else to play on the GameCube with your friends that doesn't involve a certain Italian plumber or wave dashing, definitely consider playing Kirby Air Ride. On that note, I would certainly not be opposed to a re-release, remake, or even a sequel to this game on the Switch, Nintendo. Dance Dance Revolution Mario Mix. This is most likely the first of several weird choices I have for favorite games, but this at least keeps things interesting, right? Now you're not really sure what to expect from this video. DDR Mario Mix is just one in a long line of spin-off games for the GameCube which prove that Mario can do just about anything. Combining one of the most iconic rhythm game franchises of all time with the very face of video games itself sounds ridiculously stupid, yet it also somehow just makes sense and it works. The game even comes with its own dance pad, which I used to own, so this wasn't some half-baked experiment either. There's something oddly hypnotic about watching Mario bust a move the way he does. You might think it's cringy and stupid at first, and then find yourself unable to look away as it begins to grow on you. The game sports some of the catchiest remixes to classic Mario tunes I've ever heard. The sheer variety of titles from across the franchise's history which are represented through songs is honestly quite impressive. It's got everything from the original Donkey Kong, the Famicom System startup theme, and Dr. Mario, to Mario Kart Double Dash, Mario Party 5, and even a song from Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. There were probably only 1 or 2 tracks out of the entire game I never really cared for, but everything else here is just simply fantastic. If you never get the chance to actually play this game, then I encourage you to at least listen to some of the game's music on YouTube. It's really good stuff. What's also really nice is the fact that despite the game's premise, you actually don't need the dance pad that originally came bundled with it in order to play this game. DDR Mario Mix can be played entirely with just a GameCube controller and using the analog stick to follow the arrows. This makes completing songs on higher difficulties a hell of a lot easier. Of course, playing with a controller defeats a lot of the purpose and fun of playing this game. But all I'm saying is that anyone with a controller and a copy of the game can play this, so none of you have any excuse if you have not played it already. Go play it right now, it's a lot of fun. Pokemon Colosseum. As a kid, something I always wanted from Pokemon was the ability to battle with my creatures in 3D on a home console platform. Sure, there was the Stadium series on the N64, but those games didn't offer the core single-player experience I was looking for. They were literally just about transferring over your monsters from the handheld games to battle with them in 3D, and little else. Thankfully, we later got Pokemon Colosseum on the GameCube. This title introduced a much more ambitious direction for the Pokemon series, despite the fact that it was developed by a separate company, Genius Sonority, and not Game Freak. Maybe that's why the Pokemon company doesn't really like to acknowledge its existence. It's a shame though, because the game is really different from your typical Pokemon fare in a lot of really great ways. Colosseum has the same transfer functionality as the Stadium games, and it lets players battle with the Pokemon they caught in Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Fire Red, or Leaf Green on their televisions in 3D. But what's much more noteworthy is the fact that Pokemon Colosseum sports an entire original single-player campaign. The story features an older, shady protagonist with ties to a criminal organization as opposed to your typical 10-year-old child. The concept of evil shadow Pokemon allows players to actually steal Pokemon from other trainers because it's under the excuse that the shadow Pokemon are being misused for malicious purposes by evil organizations, and the fact that you're an ex-member of one of them means you walk the fine line between being a hero and a villain. I personally loved having a protagonist that wasn't so cut and dry or black and white, and this is something I wish Game Freak and the Pokemon Company would allow more of in their newer games in order to help the older players get a little bit more out of their Pokemon experience. But it's a minor gripe. The desert setting of the game was a nice change of pace, and the musical score is excellent as well. I would love to hear any of these tracks in Colosseum appear in Smash Bros. Someday. Colosseum isn't a perfect game though. You've got this female partner who looks a lot like Misty. She tags along with you on your adventure because she has the unexplained ability to physically see which Pokemon are shadow ones, but that's about all she's good for. My issue with her is that because she follows directly behind you at all times, and because there's physical collision, you can't walk straight through her when you need to turn around 180 degrees. Instead, she has to awkwardly back up until there's enough room for her to move out of the way. This makes backtracking through any of the game's narrow corridor sections an absolute pain. Another thing worth mentioning is that you cannot steal just any Pokemon you encounter. They have to be shadow Pokemon, and the number available which you actually can catch is quite limited. It also doesn't have as many instantly recognizable fan favorites from Gen 2 or 3 as I'd hoped. I was often jealous of trainers I encountered who had Pokemon I liked, but could never have just because they weren't shadow Pokemon. On top of all that, you have a severely limited number of attempts to capture each shadow Pokemon when you encounter them. They only have one move, Shadow Rush, which also deals recoil damage to them. This means that when you're trying to weaken them and go for the capture, there's a greater likelihood that they'll kill themselves from recoil damage first, which can be incredibly frustrating when you're trying to capture them when they have low HP. You'll usually have another chance at catching the ones you missed again at some point later in the game, but they're even more resistant than before, and if you blow this chance to catch them for some reason, they're gone forever, which is an absolute pain in the ass. Thankfully, most, if not all of these issues were addressed in the sequel game, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, also for the GameCube. I don't have quite as much experience with this one, but I hear a lot of really good things about it. If the issues with the Misty partner and the limited number of Pokemon available to catch is a deal breaker for you, I would recommend you just play Gale of Darkness instead, because the partner is replaced with technology, there's a larger variety of shadow Pokemon to catch, and you can also capture wild, normal Pokemon as well. It features a different protagonist, but it explores a lot of the same locations as Colosseum, in addition to new ones as well, so you don't need to play Colosseum in order to get the most out of Gale of Darkness. But I still prefer Colosseum, and I love it a lot for introducing these changes to the typical Pokemon formula. It's a shame we haven't gotten any more Pokemon games like this since Gale of Darkness. But here's hoping that the core title currently in development for the Switch will carry the torch in a sense. Jak 2. Here you go, obligatory non-Nintendo game. My history with the Jak and Daxter series is practically identical to my one with Sly Cooper. I got my taste of the franchise through the HD collection on PS3, and loved what these games had to offer. The original title was a lot of fun, but there was something about Jak 2 that made me like it just a little bit more. I don't expect anyone else to agree with any of my opinions on this game. For example, I actually liked the weapons quite a lot. They each had unique abilities, and collectively, they felt like a nice extension to Jak's existing moveset of punching and spin-kicking enemies. I didn't mind the grittier shift in tone from the first game like I know a lot of other Jak fans did, because it never felt too on the nose about it to me. In general, Jak 2 felt like a more respectable Shadow the Hedgehog, as weird as that might sound. I kind of liked that Jak broke out of being a silent protagonist, yet he never spoke so much to the point where he was annoying either. I enjoyed exploring the futuristic city in this game, even though the vehicles controlled like absolute ass. And I always thought the story was decent. Nothing amazing, but nothing terrible. From what I've noticed, Jak 2 is notorious in the fandom for its brutal difficulty. I'm really not trying to sound like a hipster or anything, but I didn't find it to be that bad. Sure, there were a handful of missions that tripped me up for a few tries, but I didn't think the game was excruciatingly painful to play through like so many others claim it to be. Jak 2 was quite different from the precursor legacy. I don't fault anyone for not liking the changes, and I understand why so many people prefer Jak 3 over this one, but I just can't quite explain it. I just really enjoy Jak 2 a lot. It's a challenging 3D platformer, and I think its implementation of guns was one of the better ones out there. Over the Hedge. It's not so much that this cheap video game tie-in to a pretty forgettable DreamWorks film blew me away with its quality. Rather, there's a story tied to this one. When I purchased and played this game, I did so with a friend of mine, a very close one at that. He was my next door neighbor. Because we lived so close to each other, and because I was still at a point in my life where I wasn't quite old enough to have a job yet, and school wasn't that demanding of my free time, my friend and I consistently hung out at my house for about 3 or 4 days a week and just played Over the Hedge for a few hours each time. It had very little to do with the game itself. I enjoyed Over the Hedge as a film, but I can't remember if my friend had even seen it. The game is a 3D platformer beat-em-up style game, which was commonplace for these movie tie-in titles at the time. We played through the main campaign cooperatively, and completed it with minimal effort, then moved on to play the minigames that were included afterward. The one I remember the most fondly was this bumper car style game with golf carts. The objective was to use power-ups and boosts to make your car gather enough speed that when you rammed into your opponent, it would damage them enough to destroy them, leaving you as the winner. It was nothing spectacular. But for so many hours, for weeks on end, my friend and I had this routine. He came over, we played Over the Hedge, and we just talked about everything. Our likes and dislikes, the recent news, things that were going on in our personal lives. I grew to look forward to these visits and spending time with my friend. But things changed as they always do. We grew older, we went to different schools, we got jobs, and we stopped seeing each other. My friend moved out of that house and I never saw him again. The reason I'm telling you this story is because I still have my copy of Over the Hedge to this day. I haven't played it in ages, but I could never bring myself to get rid of it. I still have this cheap video game cash-in on a children's film from 2006, which probably belongs in a garage sale or the bargain bin at some secondhand retro video game shop. The reason I have it is because it reminds me of something I lost. But by hanging on to the game for all these years, I still have a part of that something with me. I know it sounds cheesy, and it's probably funny as hell to you that I'm getting all emotional about fucking Over the Hedge of all things, but it's all sentimental value. I'm sure all of you out there have something like that in your lives. Mario Party 6. If I had to pick one of my favorite Mario Party titles, it would probably be this one. I mean, I really loved 2 and 5, and 10 isn't really all that terrible either, but I only ever rented those first 2 as a kid, so my time with them was limited. Mario Party 6 was the first one I actually owned full time. I remember being excited for it at the time because of its day and night cycle gameplay. Back before I received it as a Christmas gift one year, I thought it worked in real time like Animal Crossing does, but that is not the case. Mario Party 6 changes between day and night only based on turns in the game itself. I still enjoyed that too because the way the boards change is interesting and different enough. There's not a whole lot more I can say about Mario Party 6 other than that. There were 4 Mario Party titles released for the GameCube, and they were all practically identical to one another aside from minor tweaks and additions in each one. I remember the minigames in this one being very enjoyable overall. Usually when it comes to these games, there are some minigames in particular I flat out dislike. As much as I love Mario Party 2, that one was somewhat guilty of this. But 6 doesn't really have any minigames that left such a bad taste in my mouth. I genuinely enjoy just about all of them, and I feel that there's a good amount of them here as well. This was also a minor thing, but I loved how some minigames also played out slightly differently depending on day or night. Oh yeah, this was also the Mario Party that included that gimmicky microphone that connected to the GameCube through its memory card slot. The thing barely worked half the time, but when it did, I guess it was kinda fun. I'm glad this peripheral was short-lived, but it was a novel idea to breathe some new life into this franchise at the time. Everyone has their own favorite Mario Party since there have been so many of them over the years. Mine is probably number 6. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Billy and Mandy is one of my favorite cartoons of all time. It has been ever since the show was still airing new episodes. So when I discovered years ago that a video game based on it was available, I wasted no time in picking it up, regardless of whether or not it was any good. I knew almost nothing about the game going into it, not even the genre. So it was a pretty big surprise for me to see that it's a multiplayer arena-style fighting game. The game makes excellent use of the show's license. The roster digs deep and pulls together a good variety of fan-favorite characters from the show, such as Hoss Delgado, Aris, Fred Fredburger, Scar, and Dracula. You can even play as more niche characters that had very minor appearances on the show, such as Nurgle Jr., Lord Payne, and Jack from the very first Halloween special. I can't think of any glaring omissions, so the game does a good job of covering bases and making sure that there's someone available for just about any fan of the show to recognize. The attention to detail in the levels is also very nice, so it makes me feel like I'm playing through an actual episode of the show. Not only that, but the game has aged very nicely thanks to the cel-shaded graphics, so even though this game came out years ago, it still looks nice today. All of the original voice cast returns, so everyone reprises their roles to be as good as you remember them. Therefore, it goes without saying that the voice direction in this game is nothing short of excellent. I appreciate how easy it is to pick up and play this game. You choose your favorite Billy and Mandy character and jump right into an arena based on a location from the show, where you'll duke it out with up to 3 other human players or computers. Everyone punches, kicks, slaps, slices, throws, stabs, and clobbers each other into oblivion using a slew of crazy weapons and items. Every character has a health bar and the equivalent to a special meter called the Mojo Meter. The meter is filled by dealing damage to opponents or collecting Mojo Balls as they appear on the arena. Filling the Mojo Meter once allows the player to unleash a devastating combo attack that can completely slaughter a single opponent, while filling it twice grants the character a decisive super move that can clear the screen altogether. It's hilarious, insane, and it captures the spirit of the cartoon effortlessly. As weird as this comparison might sound, Billy and Mandy is basically Power Stone meets PlayStation All-Stars. You know, if the latter was actually any fun. The game is an absolute joy to play. There's an arcade mode that can be played alone or with a friend, a mission mode to complete, and obviously there's local multiplayer as well. What's awesome about the arcade mode is that the final boss is that brain-eating meteor voiced by Voltaire. He even sings the Brain song from the episode and everything, so the fan service in this game is just brilliant. The mission mode reminds me a lot of the event matches in Smash Bros, since it puts you in scenarios that force certain characters to fight one another under certain conditions, even if they otherwise had no interaction with one another on the show. The later missions can get pretty challenging as well, so you end up devoting a lot more time to this game than you might think. If I had to criticize this game for anything, it would be the lack of any online play whatsoever. Sure, I didn't expect it when I first played the game since I had it for the GameCube, but there was a Wii version of the Billy and Mandy game. I know the Wii was not known for its wonderful online options, but the functionality was there, and I would have double dipped on this game easily if it meant I could have played it with my friends online. If you're interested in picking this game up now, I would highly recommend it. Although, you should be aware that the game does have problems with save file corruption. It happened to mine once, and I lost everything, so just be careful. That can happen. Other than that, this is by far the only Billy and Mandy game I think we'll ever need. I kind of wish we had more cartoon brawler games like this. I would absolutely play a game like this if it was based off of Regular Show or Steven Universe or something. Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games. I've always had mixed feelings about this series. I've hated its existence for playing a hand in ensuring that we never get the true Mario and Sonic crossover that these two icons deserve, but I'd be lying if I said I've never had any fun from playing the games themselves. I owned the original back on the Wii and played it enough to get my money's worth before eventually selling it. I stopped caring about these games until I played the most recent version on the Wii U. I bought this because 1. The game visually looks pretty nice in HD, and 2. It came out during one of the many game droughts that the Wii U was notorious for, simply because I had nothing else to play at the time. Rio is now by far my favorite out of the entire series. It did away with all of the gimmicky motion controls I could never fully get used to in the first game, and each event plays pretty well with just buttons, touchscreen input, or gyroscope aiming. Some of my favorite events include rugby, equestrian, BMX, and rhythmic gymnastics. That last one in particular makes characters dance in a way that reminds me a lot of DDR Mario mix, so that's probably why that one's by far my absolute favorite. The game offers healthy doses of fan service for Mario and Sonic fans alike, and some scenarios in this game are just too ridiculous to be mad at when they're played completely straight, such as Bowser riding a horse or Shadow dancing with batons. I don't fault this game for not having online play, since by this point I don't think Sega had any faith that anyone would still be playing these games. But that most likely would have furthered the longevity of my playtime had it been included. I'm not trying to paint this game as anything spectacular, and if you've already come to the decision that this series is not for you, then I highly doubt this entry will change your mind. But it's given me simple, absurd, and mindless fun, so I owe it at least some credit for that. Bayonetta 2. What is it with the number 2? Why do I love so many games that feature this number? I don't know. Anyway, this is a game that needs no introduction. In fact, I'm sure for a lot of you, this game needs no explanation either for why it's so good. It just is. The story in this game may be so far up its own ass that I couldn't give you a synopsis on what it's about if my life depended on it, but that hardly matters. All you need to know is that slaughtering angels and demons alike is smooth as butter and immensely satisfying. Bayonetta is such a witty, over-the-top lead that her personality alone is pretty much what sells people on these games, myself included. I never played any action, hack-and-slash games before Bayonetta, and I enjoyed both this one and the original from beginning to end, so the fact that it's super easy to learn and enjoy is something I cannot praise it for enough. There are numerous challenges and rewards waiting for those who choose to practice and master the game's mechanics, but if you want to simply enjoy the ride like I did, the game accommodates that playstyle as well. Despite how great this game is, I actually have very little else to say about it. The game has been talked about so much that there's not much more I can add to the conversation that hasn't already been said. If you passed on either of the Bayonetta games on Wii U, then you simply must try them when they arrive on the Switch, especially because then you'll be able to play these wonderful titles on the go. There's a reason this character was put into Smash. There's a reason why this game is being ported to the Switch, and a third installment is on the way as well. Bayonetta is simply a marvelous game, and I wish Nintendo would just buy the rights to the series already since they love funding these games so much. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. While I can't say that Breath of the Wild is my favorite game of all time, it is certainly one of the best I've ever played. It reinvigorated my sense of childlike wonder and curiosity in games. I've never played a game that is so open and can be tackled in so many different ways that I end up having completely unique stories to share with other players. This game is so massive and packed with so many secrets to discover that even with a guide, I wasn't able to find absolutely everything. There was so much I still had to learn and overcome on my own through creative thinking and trial and error experimentation, and I think that's absolutely marvelous for Nintendo to achieve in a game released in the modern age of the internet. I applaud them for producing a game that manages to surprise players in a time when instantaneous access to spoiler information and walkthroughs is commonplace. Playing Breath of the Wild is liberating to me, because while grasping the very basic mechanics of the game isn't hard, learning all the many ways they are applied is where the real challenge and joy is found. Breath of the Wild is what you make of it. There are very little boundaries or restrictions. You are responsible for carving out your own legacy, choosing your own path, and crafting your own adventures. This game will kick your ass until you become wise and persistent enough to succeed and overcome it. Except when it rains. When that happens while you're climbing, you're pretty much screwed. I can't think of any other time in a game in recent memory when I felt as powerful and accomplished as I did after I first learned how to parry the laser blast of a Guardian with my shield. After that point, I felt completely invincible, and daring enough to cross straight through the remains of Hyrule Field to confront Calamity Ganon. This was the very same path I thought I would never be able to explore a few weeks prior. There's so much content painstakingly handcrafted and polished that every player creates their own sense of progression, development, and growth. The journey off the Great Plateau is one that I will never be able to take in quite the same way as when I first set out ever again. Every future playthrough will be different because my knowledge and experience from the last one will have carried over. The fact that this game was designed in such a way to create that is beyond words. Just when I was starting to figure out what was so great about Zelda, the franchise redefined itself. For as many weird choices for games as I have presented here, there was no way I could simply not talk about Breath of the Wild in some capacity after playing it. Sure, I could have not enjoyed it. I know there are people out there who didn't, but I did, just as so many others did. I believe just as much as my fellow fans that this is just such a great game. As will probably be the case for many others out there, Breath of the Wild will go down in my personal gaming history as one of my absolute favorites. Just like last time, I encourage all of you to share some of your favorite games in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. This has been Brawlmaster012 signing off.